Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for being here today. Justice for Abdi today, right? That is why we are here.
Yeah.
My name is Yusra. I'm one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter Toronto movement. Today we are here at the constituency office of Minister Amed Hussen to demand the deportation of Abdi to be stopped now. This is part of a tri-city action that is happening in Halifax in front of the Department of Child Services. There are different folks from different communities who are there demanding the same thing, which is to stop the deportation of Abdi. There are folks also right now in Ottawa who are in front of Minister Ralph Goodale's office demanding the same thing. Besides me is Pascale Diverlus, who's also a co-founder of Black Lives Matter Toronto, Desmond, who is a journalist and an activist, and Muscati, who is the director of the International Human Rights Program at U of T Law. So 18 years of failure at the child welfare system has committed against Abdi.
Shame.
The situation that Abdi is in today is because his guardians, his caregivers, his parents, the province of Nova Scotia and the Canadian states have failed him. They failed to apply for citizenship for him when he was a child, and so many children who are in Abdul's situation have experienced this same treatment, right? Abdul is in the situation that he is in because of a matrix of systems that have created this failure, right? His caregivers that should be fighting for him in this very moment are abandoning him. It's a shame. Abdul is in the situation that he has been his entire life. He's being unsupported, he's being uncared for, he's experiencing deep isolation, and he's being abandoned in this very, very moment. The fact that the Child Welfare Services does not even have an existing policy on applying for citizenship for young children in which they take from families is an indication of the condition of child welfare services. They have the power to take and reprimand and apprehend children from families, right? They have the power to regulate parenting. They have the power to make all these decisions, yet don't have an existing policy on applying for citizenship for young children that they take. This is the condition that we are experiencing and that we are seeing Abdi go through. And it's also an experience that so many Black and Indigenous youth all across this land are also experiencing.
Shame.
Abdi has been under state control since he was 2 years old. There has been omnipresent hyper-surveillance of his everyday actions, his everyday movements. This has been happening since he was a child, right? This creates the conditions for him to be criminalized, for him to be looked at as suspicious in every turn and everything that he does, and obviously creates the conditions for a pipeline from the child welfare system to corrections, to be criminalized. This has been set up for him. He has been put in this situation. Nothing about Abdul's circumstances today is his fault. Nothing about it is his fault. He is not at fault here. It's the institutions that have worked to put him in the situation that he is in. We are here to fight against this injustice. Citizenship should be something that at minimum, what the child welfare services should be doing, applying for young people who are at the most precarious intersections and experience the most vulnerability. So we are here today to fight against that and to fight for Abdi. We have a set of very substantial, very careful, and plausible legal interventions that can be made by the people who have power to make decisions about this case. Minister Amed Hussen, Minister Ralph Goodale, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Pascale will read them out so folks know what we are talking about.
The Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness has the power to temporarily pause Mr. Abdi's deportation hearing so he does not lose his permanent resident status while pursuing his ongoing court challenge. Section 5 of the Immigration Division rule grants the minister the power to temporarily withdraw a request for a deportation hearing if no evidence has been accepted into the proceedings. Since no evidence has been accepted by the Immigration and Refugee Board in Mr. Abdi's case, the minister can request a withdrawal by notifying the board in writing before March 7th or at March 7th deportation hearing. We are demanding that this happens.
Yes.
They can also ask the Immigration Division to postpone the deportation hearing while the federal court considers Mr. Abdi's case. We are demanding this happens. The Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship could continue the process of reforming the Citizenship Act so it does not create barriers for non-citizen children in care to becoming Canadian citizens. The Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship could take proactive steps to liaise with the provincial child welfare organizations to inform them of the importance and necessary steps to regularize the status of non-citizen children in care, including tracking the number of non-citizen children in care, developing training materials for child welfare workers, and creating regulations for guidelines that modify the documentary hurdles. The Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship can modify the applicable department guidelines to clarify international human rights law must be considered when deciding whether to deport a long-term permanent resident. That a person's experience as a permanent ward of the state is a significant factor that weighs heavily against deportation. What is happening to Abdul Abdi is an injustice. It is an injustice.
It's an injustice, and it's also a crisis that we are in. And so many Black and Indigenous youth all across this land are in. They are planning on deporting him to a country
He does not know.
that he does not know, does not have a connection to in culture and in language. And it's so unsafe that Canadian officials will not even go there themselves.
Talk about
They
it.
want to punish him because of their failure and putting him in this lethal situation. This is a crisis. It's enraging and should be shaking every one of you in this country. That this is the condition that Black and Indigenous youth are in. It's such an outrageous situation that we're dealing with right now. We're talking to you right now, actually. Right now, we're talking directly to the Minister Ralph Goodale, Minister Amed Hussen, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. You acknowledge there's anti-Black racism in Canada, right? You just did an acknowledgement of the decade of the international decade of people of African descent, right? 3 years late, can you please tell them? This is the time where you can operationalize your acknowledgement, take action, interrupt this process, and do better. Take measures to put in substantive policies that will affect the quality of life of Black and Indigenous people in this land. Do better.
Do better.
So we'll hand it over to Desmond Cole and Samra Muscati to continue the remarks in this press conference.
Please, after you. Thank you. I just want to build on what Yusra said just now about the fact that there are so many Abduls that we have not encountered yet. That there are so many Black children in this country who have had the same circumstance happen, and the Department of Community Services in Nova Scotia, where there is another rally happening today in Halifax, where the people where Abdul from, where he landed in this country, are also out there right now making their voices heard, and have been raising their voices, including Fatuma Abdi, who is Abdul's sister. And Fatuma, we must also remind everyone, does not have citizenship. Abdul and Fatuma were not just taken into the care of the state. It is a shame, because Abdul and Fatuma were not just taken into the care of the state, they were then separated from each other in care. And neither of these young people have citizenship now in their adulthood. So we're fighting for Fatuma, and Fatuma is fighting for herself and her brother today in Halifax. But how many other young people? The Department of Community Services in Nova Scotia says that it wants to do a review of similar cases, but they have not committed to find all of the young people that they have put into these situations and say, we are going to make sure you get your citizenship. We are going to start a redress program for you. We haven't heard that yet. We hear from the Prime Minister, as was said, we hear from Minister Hussen, whose office we're in, that they, according to their own words, what happened to Abdul was wrong. But they're willing to let the gears of this process continue to grind. It's very, very telling. So I spoke with Abdul last night, and I said, is there anything that you want me to say today? And Abdul said, I want people to know that I feel like I'm being bullied. that I feel like there's some big bully and that all of my friends and all of my people around me, as hard as they try, that they can't knock down this bully. This is a young man who has had to endure so much. And the fact that he is even here today fighting and giving us an opportunity to fight on his behalf, we owe it to Abdul, and we owe it to all of the young people in this country who have been through similar circumstance to take on that bully, to take on the system that keeps doing this. Because when I was looking at some of the messages that were going around for Abdul today, one of his supporters has a W.E.B. Du Bois quote that says, "A system that is not designed to serve you can't fail you." The system can only fail you if it was designed to serve you in the first place. And the problem of this system is that it is not designed to help and serve people like Abdul. So that is what we're here to change. We're demanding that the politicians who are in authority right now do what they are able to do, but not just that. So there's two things, and then I'll hand it over to Samer. One thing is that Amed Hussen, Al Jones and I stood in front of Amed Hussen in December, and he told us that he has intervened in hundreds of similar cases. Hundreds. He used the word twice. He said hundreds of cases. So at what point do you intervene for Abdul? Why are you selling us back to us? Why are you selling this pain and suffering that young people have to go through back to us as if you are doing us a favor? You haven't intervened for Abdul, even though you say that you have the ability to do so. And then beyond that, and that's my second and final point, when is the Minister of Citizenship, Immigration and Refugees going to acknowledge that it is the process that he oversees that allows this to happen? When is he going to stop acting powerless to the system that he controls and can influence and can overhaul? Because an entire overhaul of the system that does this to people like Abdul is what's necessary. We don't just want justice for him in this case. We don't want to be back here again fighting for the next person who's in this situation. So justice for Abdul, justice for Fatuma Abdi, justice for all of the young people in this country, including indigenous people who are also, because the government takes them into care, unable to claim status that they too deserve to be able to claim on this land. We have to find solutions for all of them, and we continue the fight. I hand it over to Samer.
First, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank the community, the organizers, Black Lives Matter, for not only this event, but all the incredible work that's been going on to keep the spotlight on Abdul Abdi. We're honored to stand with you, and we're grateful for your tremendous efforts to prevent Mr. Abdi's exile. I use the term exile deliberately. Mr. Abdi is a person we've taken into Canada as a refugee child fleeing a war-torn country, a person we've then failed through our broken foster care system, and a person whose legal guardian, the state, did not even provide the safety of citizenship for which he was fully eligible. Canada is Mr. Abdi's own country. It's his only country. If we remove Mr. Abdi from Canada, we are not deporting him. We are exiling him.
Yes.
And in doing so, we tear apart the rule of law and all sense of compassion we strive to nourish in this country. Exiling Mr. Abdi to Somalia, a country where he has never set foot, a country so dangerous that Global Affairs Canada has advised against all travel, is vindictive and inhumane.
Yes.
In 2011, the UN Human Rights Committee ruled on a case almost identical to Mr. Abdi's. Just like Mr. Abdi, Jama Warsame was born in Saudi Arabia, but only inherited his mother's Somali citizenship, and he also came to Canada as a young child. Neither Mr. Abdi or Warsame had ever lived in Canada. Had ever lived in Somalia prior to arriving in Canada. They have no family left in Somalia, and they can't speak the Somali language. The UN found that deporting Mr. Warsame would violate international human rights law. In particular, Canada would violate Mr. Warsame's right to life, right to freedom from cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatments, right to family life, as well as his right to remain in his own country. Nevertheless, in March 2012, the Conservative government deported him. Shame. At a town hall meeting in Nova Scotia earlier this year, Prime Minister Trudeau acknowledged that the care system had failed Mr. Abdi. And he went on to say that Canada's immigration system is based on rules and principles, but that it is also compassionate and reflects individual cases. Our immigration system should be based on rules and compassion. The two should not be mutually exclusive.
Thank you.
The Liberal government has an opportunity to act differently than the Conservative government of 2012 and abide by international human rights law. If Prime Minister Trudeau is serious that the rule of law and the principle of compassion govern this country, Mr. Abdi must not be deported or put in exile.
Thank you.
So now we'll open up the floor for any questions that media may have for us.
My name's Molly McTaggart. I'm from Humber News Online. I got talking to Nathaniel Eskren-Smith. He said that an MP, if the individual signs over authorization, could look into the case. I'm just wondering if Amed Hussen has done anything like that to try and, help him from preventing deportation.
No. We know that a while ago, Abdul's relatives approached Minister Hussen to let him know about this case. We've reported on that going back a couple of months, and kept coming back and kept coming back and kept coming back, and we're ultimately told, there's nothing that we can do for you, we're closing your file. So although the minister has been, through his office, made aware of this case, he has not responded. He has only responded by expressing sympathy for Abdul, which we think, without action, is completely inappropriate. It doesn't mean anything at this point. And having to make Abdul go through the psychological and emotional pain of this ongoing deportation process while the minister dawdles, frankly, it just really shows the callousness of this entire system.
So are you hoping that this will then reopen the file if it's closed?
I'll let others, if anybody else wants it. The only thing I can say about that is that, this is not a situation of a minister needing to, pour over some paperwork and try to decide and make a decision about what to do. This isn't case management. This is a young man's life. And if he's telling us already that he's intervened hundreds of times, I don't know what his process is for doing that. He just needs to do it, right? It's not a case of process anymore. This is about the will to do it or to not do it. So whatever it is that we've outlined the processes that can now stop this process for the moment, and to give the federal court, where Abdul has already won, an opportunity to say this is not this is a violation of his rights, and that you need to go back. We want that opportunity for that to play out, and Ralph Goodale has said, Ralph Goodale is the one we really need to hear from as well. We're here in Toronto at Minister Hussen's office, but the minister has not even acknowledged out of his own mouth that he knows about this case and is doing something about it too. So public safety and the Minister of Citizenship, Immigration and Refugees have to kind of come together, and this is their job, isn't it? Isn't this their job? So let them go through their process and stop telling us that the process is the obstacle.
Has the minister made a statement? Has the minister said anything to date?
Goodale?
Ahmed Hussen.
Well, like I said, Minister Hussen told us as far back as December that first he said he was not aware of the case.
Okay.
But then as pressure mounted and he was asked again and again about this, he said just what the Prime Minister said, which is that what happened to Abdul is wrong.
Okay.
And there has been nothing since.
Okay.
So we don't know what that means without any action.
So what are the next steps then?
You have to ask this to the ministers
Right.
who refuse to talk to us.
Right. We are making these interventions and making a public record of multiple interventions with these ministers about this grave oversight, this violation of rights, these dehumanizing treatment of black and young people who are black and indigenous people who are the most vulnerable under this state, right? So we continue to make this public record, and it's up to everyone in this room and everyone in the society, in our communities, to continue elevating this case and continuing to interrupt this process and continuing to make a public record of how many times we have to say that this deportation needs to be stopped and there needs to be substantive changes that are made in the institutions that have facilitated this situation, right? That is not even an individual experience, it's a systemic condition. This is what we're talking about, institutional and systemic condition of deprivation, of violation, right? That we're challenging. So please continue tweeting, continue emailing, continue calling, right? The hearing is tomorrow on March 7th in the morning. So when we leave here, it doesn't stop, continue, because this this actually not being responded to in a state like Canada in the time that we are in is absolutely shameful. Absolutely shameful that people have to continue to intervene and interrupt this process. How many more should we do? How many times should we do this? Act. The ministers need to act now.
What about the state of his sister? Do you know what stage that's at right now?
I don't know that anybody in government has taken, again, any action to actually pursue this. And again, these are things, we see people come from other countries, and there are ceremonies where people who've never lived here are given honorary citizenship. Are you really telling me that this government doesn't know what to do if it really wants to intervene and support somebody?
Yes, for sure.
This is not about process, right? I have to say that over and over again. It's about the will to want to do it. And all that we see lacking in terms of Fatuma Abdi, in terms of Abdul Abdi, and in terms of failing to even because if the government wanted to show us they're serious, the first thing they would do, I think, is they would say, we're going to make sure this doesn't happen to anybody ever again. We have not heard those words. The second thing they would do is say, we're going to identify all the young people that this has already happened to, and we're going to seek a redress for them immediately. They have not said those things. Once they say those things, then we can commit to the process that's going to get there. But until we hear that, we're going to have to be coming back here, and that's a shame.
Has the Federation of Black Canadians responded to this case or initiated any kind of plans?
The only thing that I'm going to say about that is today is about Abdul, and today is about young people who are in Abdul's situation.
Yes.
Different people in our community are taking different measures to try and attack this issue, but if you're not able to ask for Abdul's freedom today, and to ask for the freedom of all the young people in this situation, you're not part of the conversation. So we welcome anybody in this country, any organization, any group, any other level of government that wants to speak up, because Abdul also happens to be here in the city of Toronto, where there are there's a body, a city council body. We don't hear a peep out of them. We don't hear a peep out of Premier Kathleen Wynne. All of these public officials can say something if they want to.
They're all guilty.
We don't have a monopoly on fighting for Abdul. We are in contact with Abdul, I will say that. We are working very closely with Abdul and taking direction from him about how to support him. But this is everybody's fight, and it's incumbent on everybody to get on board with making sure that this young man gets free.
And how is
Just to add to that really quickly, Abdul Abdi is here with us today. He's alive. He's here right now, and the way that people even should be talking about him is to advocate for his life, right? To advocate for the interruption of this deportation, not to describe his condition or what he's going through. Take a stance, right? Take a stance for action to stop this. That's what we're saying also as well.
Yeah.
There was another question.
How did it get escalated to this point that he's in the position of being deported and his sister's not quite there yet, being that they came at the same time?
Well, Abdul was put in immigration detention, and that was a tactic done by the government, I think, to try and isolate him from public so that they could begin this deportation process. Abdul was released from the end of a sentence in the East Coast, and he was just, as we see so many times, immediately apprehended once again by border services. And the plan was, as with so many young people and so many people in the situation, to keep Abdul in prison indefinitely while they processed this. And that would have made it a lot harder for all of us to communicate with him. It would have made it impossible for his family to communicate with him. Abdul, at one point in this ordeal, was transferred to Lindsay, Ontario, to the Central East Correctional Facility. There are dozens of men in there. There are men who have been in there for weeks on immigration detention, for months on immigration detention. There are a few men who have been there for years on immigration detention, not charged with a crime, but they're on an immigration issue. And so this is so much broader than what we're seeing here. Abdul's situation just happens to have really caught people's attention, and we're grateful for that. But this is the time to now change the circumstance.
And have you had a chance to talk to his sister or any of his family? Can you tell us how they're feeling?
His sister is in Halifax doing media today, actually. I'm sure you're going to see her on the news yourself. She's been very, very strong in advocating. She's been all in the media since this began. Fatuma is an incredible person who can speak for herself. Her words are in the media.
I think also I'd like to redirect the onus to what happened decades ago. Abdul was taken and not applied, like his citizenship wasn't applied for him. If you can apprehend a child, then you have the responsibility to also make sure that his quality of life is being sustained and thought about for decades down the line. This started decades ago. It's literally started decades ago, and the inability and irresponsibility of not actually thinking about his livelihood now and not thinking about his life now.
But pardon my ignorance on this one, but should his foster parents have applied for citizenship for him?
It's not a case of the foster parents.
Okay.
When you're in that situation, the only person who is allowed to apply for you is your guardian. And when Abdul was taken from his family, the DCS became his guardian. That means that they were not only required to apply for him, they were the only people who had the legal right to apply for Abdul. No one else could do it, including his family. That's why we're putting the onus on them for being in the situation that we're in today, because they failed him.
Abdul wasn't fostered, he was a crown ward. So that's very different. I think it's an important fact for people to note.
And the remedy for that is not to deport him. The remedy to that is to give him citizenship now. That's made by Canada. This is Canada's responsibility to rectify the wrongs instead of exasperating them.
And the words, the empty promises, and all the words actually mean nothing if you're not actually going to act on it. I'm talking about anti-blackness, recognizing, people of African descent, it actually means nothing if you're not actually doing anything to, again, ensure the quality of life of Black people in this country.
If I could just add to that really quickly, when people ask us if the Liberal government right now and some of the little recognitions that it's giving, if we're happy about that, this is my response, is that this is what those recognitions are worth. Is that when somebody in our community really actually needs our support, this government is not stepping up. So we're not going to act grateful and thankful for word of mouth one day, for just lip service, quite frankly, one day. And then when it comes to the actual crises that are in our lives, the emergency, as Yusra said, that's in our lives right now, there's silence. We can't accept that. It's not good enough for Black people in this country in 2018. It's not.
I heard people attended at Ahmed Hussein's house, so I'd like to know what the reaction was and what did he say when he wasn't prepped?
Well, I don't think any of us were there.
No, we weren't there.
No.
So you would have to ask those folks.
This is what we were advised to do through Abdi, run a press conference, let people know what's happening with the story so that more people can get involved, and also this can shine light on all the other people and all the other cases that are happening to make sure that people call Ralph Goodale, call Minister Hussen, and make sure that these folks actually stand up to their principles. This is inhumane treatment, and so we're here to one, acknowledge that, one, put pressure on that, and to make sure that this never happens again.
That's right.
We're already late.
So any wrapping up questions that we could just take up before we wrap up?
I've read a lot of grueling reports about the abuse he went through in foster care, and I'm kind of wondering if Black Canadians face a disproportionate rate of abuse in foster care compared to the non-Black population, or if there's reports.
That's a really amazing question, and if our governments would agree to keep statistics on those kinds of things, then we would more easily be able to answer that really important question. But what we are seeing actually is not only do we not have a lot of statistics for things like that, that the government is very afraid of initiating the process to start keeping them. We do know in Toronto that approximately 40% of the new child welfare cases in this city are Black children. I said 40. And that's in a city with about 8% Black population, Black children. So the same system that was designed to take young Indigenous children away from their families, to strip them of their language, to strip them of their culture, to strip them of their sense of self, is happening now where our kids are being taken into foster care and no one is worried about what religion these children were raised in, about how they comb their hair, about so many basic things just about caring for young black children who are now increasingly being apprehended, and are being apprehended for reasons like school officials calling the children's services on them, neighbors calling the children's services on them. Our lives are so precarious, right? That one phone call from somebody who doesn't even know us or care about us can throw us into the jaws of these systems. So I can tell you it's 40% of the new cases in Toronto as of recent numbers, and I can tell you that nobody else regionally or across the country wants to collect those statistics because they'll be so shamed, we know, by what they find. We know anecdotally what it looks like, though. We know.
We'd like to thank you for coming today. Justice for Abdi. Stay connected with the case. There's a tri-city action happening. So find out what's happening in Halifax and Ottawa and Regina. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank you, everybody.
Keep calling.
Keep calling, keep
keep
tweeting.
writing, keep texting,
emailing.
keep tweeting.
It's not done. It's not done. Not that